6 years ago, I left home with $300 and a vow to never look back. Today, my chief operating officer handed me a desperate proposal from Ridgeway Dynamics. My father's company is bleeding money and begging for a lifeline, completely unaware that the CEO he is trying to woo is the daughter he discarded. He told me I had no future in tech, yet here he is, asking me to save his... My name is Harper Rodriguez, and right now, I am standing on the 42nd floor of the Rains Tower, watching the relentless Seattle drizzle blur the city lights into streaks of gray and gold. To the business world, I am the CEO of HelioForge Labs, a woman who built a billion-dollar B2B software empire out of thin air, grit, and caffeine. To the staff outside my glass walls, I am the calm, unshakable force that navigates market crashes and acquisition talks without blinking. But 6 years ago, I was just a girl with a trembling hand, gripping a handle that belonged to a suitcase held together by duct tape. I had $300 in my pocket, a stomach full of anxiety, and a heart that had been broken by the very people who were supposed to protect it. I walked out of a house in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I never looked back. I changed my name, I changed my hair, I changed everything except the code that lived in my head. The intercom buzzed, snapping me out of the memory. "Harper? Ben is here with the urgent partner reviews." My assistant's voice came through, crisp and professional. "Send him in," I said. Turning away from the window, I smoothed the front of my blazer, a habit I had developed to center myself. Ben, my chief operating officer, walked in with the frenetic energy of a man who had already consumed 4 espressos before 10 in the morning. He was carrying a stack of 4 thick binders. He dropped them onto the mahogany conference table with a heavy thud. "Okay, boss," Ben said, diving straight into business. "We have 4 companies on the waiting list for the beta integration partnership. The board wants us to pick one by Friday to keep the Q3 projections on track. I've flagged one that looks desperate enough to give us favorable terms, but their financials are a horror show." I walked over to the table. "Which one?" "Top of the pile," Ben said, tapping the dark blue folder. "Legacy company out of Raleigh. Great client list historically, but they are bleeding out. They need this tech partnership to survive the fiscal year." I froze. Raleigh. My fingers hovered over the cover of the folder. A cold sensation, like ice water, trickled down my spine. I flipped the cover open. Ridgeway Dynamics. The logo had not changed. It was the same jagged mountain peak design that used to be embroidered on the polo shirts my father wore to the country club. I stared at the name, and for a split second, the air left the room. "Harper?" Ben asked, his voice sounding distant. "You okay?" I forced a breath into my lungs. "I'm fine, just evaluating." I looked at the cover letter. It was signed with a flourish I knew better than my own handwriting. Douglas Ridgeway, CEO. He had written this. My father had sat at his heavy oak desk, the same desk where he once told me I didn't have the mind for complex systems, and he had typed out a plea for help. Of course, he didn't know he was writing to me, to him. Harper Rodriguez was just a name in a tech magazine, a stranger on the West Coast. He had no idea that Harper Rodriguez was the daughter he had erased from his life. I sat down, keeping my face impassive. "Tell me the numbers. Ben, give it to me straight." "It is bad," Ben said, grimacing. "Revenue is in freefall. They have lost 30% of their enterprise clients in the last 18 months. Their flagship product is stagnant. Nobody wants it anymore because it is clunky and slow. Basically, they are drowning, and they see our optimization engine as the only life raft available. If we say no, they are insolvent within 2 quarters. I ran my finger down the column of figures. 30% churn, 2 quarters of the runway left. The great Douglas Ridgeway, the man who prided himself on efficiency and legacy, was piloting a sinking ship. "He wants a meeting," Ben added. "He is flying into Seattle tonight. He is pushing hard for a sit-down tomorrow." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that contradicted my calm exterior. He was coming here. Set it up, I said. My voice sounded surprisingly steady. Ben looked surprised. Really? You usually send the VP of sales for the initial vet. You want to take this one personally? Yes, I said. I want to see them. Tomorrow afternoon, 2:00. Okay. Ben pulled out his tablet to make a note. I will send the invite to Douglas and his team. Full protocol? No, I cut in sharply. New protocol. On the invitation, list me only as Harper, CEO. Do not include my last name. Do not attach a bio or a headshot to the calendar invite. Ben paused, his thumbs hovering over the screen. He looked up at me, confused, knitting his brows. That is highly irregular. Harper, they might think it is unprofessional. They are the ones begging for a lifeline. Ben, I said, my voice hardening. They do not get to dictate professionalism. They get to show up on time. Make sure the room is booked, the main boardroom, the one with the view. Understood, Ben said slowly, sensing he shouldn't push further. Harper, CEO, 2:00 tomorrow. He turned to leave, but I called him back. Leave the file. Once Ben was gone, I picked up the Ridgeway Dynamics folder again. I flipped past the financials, past the pathetic marketing projections, and reached the technical appendix at the back. This was where they outlined their current architecture, the broken system they wanted my company to fix. I scanned the diagrams. It was a mess of patched-together code and outdated server calls. But then, my eyes caught something on page 42. It was a data flow schema, a specific logic gate for sorting inventory queries. I blinked, bringing the paper closer to my face. The structure of the loops, the way the database prioritized the cache, it was familiar. It wasn't just standard industry practice. It was idiosyncratic. It was a specific architectural style I had obsessed over when I was 19. I stood up and walked to the door, locking it with a sharp click. I went back to the desk and stared at the diagram. I remembered sitting on the floor of my bedroom, the carpet scratching my legs, mapping this exact flow on a yellow legal pad because I didn't have the money for a whiteboard. I had shown this concept to my father once. He had glanced at it for 3 seconds and asked if I had finished my chores. And now, here it was, in his company's official technical documentation. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. It was a dry, hollow sound. They had told me I had no talent. They had told me my sister, Samantha, was the visionary. Yet here they were, using a bastardized version of my old work to try and keep their company alive, and coming to me to fix it when it inevitably broke. I walked back to the window. The rain was coming down harder now, washing against the glass in sheets. Are they coming to beg? I whispered to the empty room. Or are they dragging me back to the house that crushed me? The city below looked small, manageable, but the feeling in my chest was vast and unruly. I felt the old anger, the 14-year-old girl's humiliation, the 19-year-old's despair, but I also felt something else. Power. For the first time in my life, I held all the cards. Douglas Ridgeway was walking into my building, into my city, to ask for my help. He didn't know who I was. He didn't know that the Harper on the invitation was the girl he had let walk out into the night with nothing. I placed my hand against the cold glass of the window. Let them come, I said, my voice low and final. The meeting would happen, but it wouldn't be a negotiation. It would be a reckoning, and everything, absolutely everything, would happen according to my rules. The rain in Seattle was cold, but it was nothing compared to the chill that lived inside the house on Sycamore Drive. I was 14 years old when I realized that in the economy of the Ridgeway family, I was a depreciating asset. I had spent 6 months scrubbing dishes at a local diner, saving every greasy dollar bill and quarter until I had $300. It was enough to buy a refurbished laptop from a pawn shop downtown. It was a brick of a machine, heavy enough to anchor a boat, with a fan that sounded like a jet engine taking off. But to me, it was a portal. I spent my nights bathed in the blue glow of that screen, teaching myself Python from pirated PDFs and forums that took 5 minutes to load. While other girls my age were worrying about homecoming dances, I was obsessing over logic gates and data structures. I built a tool. It was simple by my current standards, but for a 14-year-old, it was a marvel. A script that could automate the inventory tracking for a small warehouse, predicting stock shortages based on past sales velocity. I remember the Tuesday I decided to show him. My father was in the living room, sitting in his leather armchair, the one nobody else was allowed to touch. He was reviewing quarterly reports, a tumbler of scotch resting near his elbow. I walked in, clutching the heavy laptop to my chest, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Dad?" I asked, my voice small. He didn't look up. "Busy, Harper." "I made something," I said, stepping closer. "It is a program. For the business. It helps track." I set the laptop on the coffee table and hit enter. The code cascaded down the screen, green text on black, executing perfectly. It sorted a dummy dataset of 5,000 items in under 3 seconds. I looked at him, waiting. I was waiting for the spark, for him to realize that his quiet, awkward daughter spoke his language. He glanced at the screen. His eyes stayed there for maybe 4 seconds. Then his phone buzzed. He picked up the phone. "Douglas speaking," he said, his voice instantly shifting into that warm, commanding baritone he saved for clients. He looked at me, covered the receiver with one hand, and gave a dismissive wave. "That is nice, honey. Keep playing with your games." He turned his back to me to take the call. I stood there for a long time, the fan of the laptop whirring in the silence, watching the cursor blink. That is nice. Games. It wasn't just that he didn't care. It was that he couldn't see me, my sister. Samantha was the sun we all orbited. She was 2 years older, blonde, charismatic, and had a smile that could sell sand to a desert nomad. She was the captain of the debate team. She was the class president. When she walked into a room, the energy shifted toward her. My father called her a Kitrolako leader. He took her to golf outings. He let her sit in on board meetings. He groomed her not just as a daughter, but as a successor. I was just the background noise. By the time I was 17, the divide had turned into a canyon. We were at dinner, a rare occasion where everyone was seated at the same time. I had spent weeks rehearsing what I was going to say. I cleared my throat, gripping my fork until my knuckles turned white. "I am applying to universities next month," I said. "I want to major in computer science. I think I have a real shot at the top tech programs." My father laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh. It was a chuckle of genuine amusement, which was infinitely worse. "Computer science?" he asked, reaching for the salt. "Harper, be realistic. You do not have the technical temperament. You are too soft for that world. It is a grinder. I wrote a program that coding in your bedroom is not the industry. Harper." He cut me off, his voice flat. "Samantha is the one with the executive mindset. She is the one who understands how to build a legacy. You? You would be better off in something supportive. Human resources, maybe, or library sciences." Samantha smiled at me from across the table. It was a pitying smile. "Don't worry, Harper," she said. "When I take over, I will hire you to fix the printers." They both laughed. I stared at my plate, the food turning to ash in my mouth. 6 months later, the acceptance letter came. It was from one of the most prestigious engineering schools in the country. Not just an acceptance, but a full academic scholarship. A full ride. They wanted me. The dean had written a handwritten note at the bottom praising the portfolio I had submitted. I decided to tell them at the 4th of July party. Our backyard was filled with my father's business associates, investors, and friends. I had the letter in the pocket of my sundress. I felt the sharp corner of the envelope digging into my hip, a physical reminder of my worth. During a toast, I stepped forward. "I have some news," I started. My father put a heavy hand on my shoulder, physically steering me aside. "Hold on, Harper," he boomed, addressing the crowd. "Before we get to dessert, I want to propose a toast to the future of Ridgeway Dynamics. My daughter Samantha has just secured an internship with Senator Coburn's office, a stepping stone to the leadership role she was born for." Applause erupted. Glasses clinked. Samantha beamed, soaking in the adoration. "And Harper," my father added, looking down at me with a half-smile. "Made the potato salad. Let's give her a hand." The laughter was polite, rippling through the crowd. I felt my face burn. My hand went to my pocket, crushing the letter into a ball. I never took it out. I realized then that I could win a Nobel Prize. And to him, I would still just be the girl who made the salad. The final cut happened on graduation day. I sat in the sea of blue gowns, the humid air thick with anticipation, when they called my name, Harper Rodriguez Ridgeway, summa cum laude. I walked across the stage. I scanned the crowd for my family. I saw my mother. She was sitting alone in the bleachers, clutching her purse, looking small and fragile in her floral dress. The seat next to her was empty. After the ceremony, I found her in the parking lot. She looked tired. "Where is he?" I asked. I didn't need to ask, but I needed to hear it. "Samantha had a pitch meeting," Mom said softly, unable to meet my eyes. "Douglas thought it was a crucial opportunity to meet a potential angel investor for her first startup idea. He said you would understand. It is just a ceremony. Harper. Just a ceremony. 4 years of perfect grades, the highest honors in my department, and he was across town, selling his golden child to another investor." That night, the house was quiet. My father and Samantha were out celebrating her potential deal. I didn't cry. I think I had run out of tears years ago. I went to my room and pulled out the old duffel bag I used for gym class. I packed efficiently. 3 pairs of jeans, 5 shirts, my laptop, the acceptance letter I had never shown him. I looked around the room that had been my prison and my sanctuary. I took nothing that he had bought me, nothing that could be used as leverage to say I owed him. I walked down the stairs at 2 a.m. The wood creaked under my boots. My mother was waiting at the bottom of the landing. She was wearing her dressing gown, standing in the shadows like a ghost. She didn't ask me where I was going. She didn't tell me to stay. She knew. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. She smelled like lavender and sadness. "He does not see," she whispered into my ear, her voice trembling. "He refuses to see, but I do." She pulled back and pressed a thick white envelope into my hand. Then, she shoved it deep into the front pocket of my backpack before I could protest. "Go," she said. "Don't look back. Harper, just go." I walked out the front door into the heavy, humid Carolina night. I walked past my father's luxury sedan parked in the driveway. I walked past the manicured lawn he was so proud of. I walked until the house was just a speck in the distance, and then I walked until it was gone completely. I touched the pocket where the envelope lay, but I didn't open it yet. I had $300 of my own money and a fire in my chest that felt hot enough to burn the world down. I made a vow to the empty street. I would never ask for anyone's permission again. I would never beg for a seat at the table. I would build my own table, and I would build it so high that they would have to crane their necks just to see the bottom of it. The bus ride to Tacoma took 3 hours and felt like crossing into a different dimension. I traded the manicured lawns of Raleigh for the industrial gray skyline of the Pacific Northwest. I found a studio apartment that was legally generous to call a studio. It was a glorified closet above a laundromat, smelling perpetually of dryer sheets and stale rain. I bought a plastic folding table from a thrift store for $12, set up my laptop, and that became my world. For the first 6 months, I existed in a state of controlled delirium. I picked up contract work during the day, fixing broken websites for local bakeries, debugging spaghetti code for small logistics firms, anything that paid in cash and didn't ask too many questions. I lived on instant noodles and gas station coffee, but the nights were mine, every night, from 8 in the evening until 4 in the morning. I was building the architecture I had tried to show my father, but better. I stripped it down, rebuilt the engine, and made it leaner. I was creating a platform that could digest massive amounts of enterprise data and spit out optimization strategies in real time. It was unsexy, back-end work, but I knew it was the spine that every bloated corporation in America desperately needed. One rainy Tuesday, when my bank account hovered dangerously close to double digits, I finally opened the envelope my mother had shoved into my bag. Inside was a stack of bills totaling $2,000. It was her emergency fund, likely squirreled away from grocery budgets for years. Beneath the cash was a small, cream-colored business card. Marianne Klein, Angel Investor, Bellevue. I stared at the card for 3 weeks. Calling felt like admitting I needed help. It felt like relying on the network my father claimed I didn't belong in. But hunger has a way of clarifying your priorities. When my landlord threatened eviction over a late payment, I picked up the phone. I didn't use my last name. I just said I was referred to by a mutual friend. The assistant didn't ask for details. She just gave me a slot. 8:30 the next morning, 10 minutes, no more, no less. I drove a rental car I couldn't afford to Bellevue. The office was all glass and polished steel, a stark contrast to my damp Tacoma studio. Marianne Klein was a woman who looked like she was carved out of granite, sharp features, silver hair cut in a severe bob, and eyes that missed nothing. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I didn't tell her my life story or give her a sob story about a runaway daughter. I opened my laptop. Corporations waste 40% of their operational budget on data redundancy, I said, launching the terminal. I built a tool that cuts that waste to under 5% within 30 days of integration. This is the pilot running on a dummy dataset of 1 million SKUs. I hit enter. The progress bar flashed, done in 0.4 seconds. Marianne leaned forward. She watched the numbers settle. She asked me to run it again with a forced error. The system self-corrected instantly. She closed the laptop lid herself. "You built this alone?" "Yes," I said. "It is aggressive," she noted, studying my face. "It is messy on the front end, but the logic is beautiful. Who are you?" "I am Harper," I said. "Harper Ridgeway," she said. It wasn't a question. My blood ran cold. I started to pack up my computer. "If this is about my father, I will leave." "Sit down," Marianne commanded. Her voice wasn't angry. It was practical. "I knew your mother before she married Douglas. She called me. She said you might come. She didn't ask me to give you money. She asked me to give you a fair shot. That demo you just showed me? That was your shot, and you nailed it." She pulled a checkbook out of her desk drawer. The pen scratched against the paper, a sound that was louder than the rain outside. She tore the check out and slid it across the mahogany desk. It was for $50,000. Seed money. "I have one condition," Marianne said, her eyes locking onto mine. "If you take this money, you do not build this company as a Ridgeway. That name comes with baggage. And frankly, your father's reputation in the valley is that of a dinosaur. You need to be fresh. You need to be clean. Build this on your own merit." I looked at the check. Then I looked at her. "My middle name is Rodriguez. It was my grandmother's name. Harper Rodriguez." Marianne tested the sound of it. She nodded. "Harper Rodriguez, CEO of Helio Forge," I said. The name had come to me in a dream. Something born from the sun and heat. Forging something new. Helio Forge Labs. "Done," she said. "That $50,000 didn't go to rent or clothes. It went to servers. It went to incorporation fees." I moved out of the studio and into a shared workspace. I hired my first 2 engineers, 2 dropouts I found on a coding forum who were just as hungry and angry as I was. We worked 18 hours a day. We slept under our desks. We ate pizza that was 3 days old. We landed our first client, a mid-sized logistics firm in Oregon. 3 months later. When our software cut their shipping delays by 20% in the first week, word spread. The second client came to us, then the third. Then a massive retail giant signed a contract that added a 0 to our valuation overnight. It was a blur of motion. I stopped counting the hours. I stopped feeling the fatigue. I became a machine of execution. I learned to read contracts better than I read novels. I learned to fire people who didn't share the vision. I learned that kindness in business is optional, but clarity is mandatory. 3 years later, we moved into the Raines Tower in downtown Seattle. The smell of dryer sheets was gone, replaced by the scent of filtered air and expensive espresso. We had 350 employees. We had offices opening in London and Singapore. I had an office with a view of the Sound, a personal assistant, and a reputation in the industry as a ghost. I didn't do panel discussions. I didn't go to networking galas. I declined every interview request that asked about my personal life, to the world. Harper Rodriguez was a prodigy who appeared out of the ether. I never Googled them, not once. It became a superstition. If I typed Ridgeway Dynamics into the search bar, it would open a door I had welded shut. I didn't want to know if my father was proud of Samantha. I didn't want to know if my mother was still sitting alone on the bleachers. I told myself that the scar on my past had healed, and the only way to keep it from tearing open was to pretend the wound never existed. I was Harper Rodriguez. I was the CEO of a billion-dollar company, and I was entirely, completely, and safely alone, or so I thought, until the proposal landed on my desk, bringing the past crashing into my present with the violence of a breaking storm. The dossier on my desk was thick, glossy, and printed on paper that probably cost more than my first month of rent in Tacoma, to the untrained eye. The prospectus for Ridgeway Dynamics looked like a standard plea from a legacy company seeking modernization. It was filled with buzzwords like synergy, legacy architecture, and market pivots, but I did not have an untrained eye. I had eyes that had spent the last 6 years staring at lines of code and balance sheets until they blurred into a single language of truth. And the truth was that Ridgeway Dynamics was rotting from the inside out. I sat in the secure data room of Helio Forge, the air conditioning humming a low, sterile note. Ben sat across from me, watching as I dissected the file with a red pen. "Look at the burn rate," I said, circling a figure on page 12. "They are spending $300,000 a month just on client retention, yet their churn rate is hovering at 18%. That is not a business. That is a bucket with a hole in the bottom." Ben nodded, tapping his tablet. "Their runway is less than 6 months old. Harper, if they do not sign a major partnership or get a liquidity injection by the 3rd quarter, they miss payroll. That is why they are pushing so hard for the meeting tomorrow. They are desperate." I flipped the page, and my stomach tightened. There, smiling up from a glossy team biography page, was a face I had tried to scrub from my memory. Samantha Ridgeway, Vice President of Operations. The bio described her as the nucleus of the turnaround strategy and a visionary leader driving the next generation of Ridgeway products. I read the list of initiatives under her command: Project Phoenix, the Apex integration, the Skyline protocol. I pulled up the industry reports on my screen to cross-reference. Project Phoenix was 18 months behind schedule. The Apex integration had been quietly shelved after a disastrous beta launch that leaked client data. The Skyline protocol was currently facing a class action lawsuit for breach of contract. "She is failing upwards," I murmured, the bitterness coating my tongue like old copper. "Every project she touches turns to ash, yet they promote her and give her a fancier title." "Nepotism is a hell of a drug," Ben remarked dryly. He didn't know the relation, of course. To him, it was just another case of corporate incompetence. "But look at the new board member, Calvin Rourke." I shifted my gaze to the next profile. Calvin Rourke. He was a new addition, appointed only 4 months ago. His photo showed a man in his late 40s with teeth that were too white and a suit that looked sharper than a scalpel. His background was in distressed assets and aggressive restructuring. He wasn't a builder. He was a vulture. Men like Calvin Rourke didn't join boards to help companies grow. They joined to strip them for parts or sell them to the highest bidder before the corpse got cold. "He is the handler," I said, analyzing the timeline. "He is there to make sure the company looks pretty enough to sell. He is not interested in technology. He is interested in the exit strategy. So, do we pass? Ben asked. If the product is stagnant and the leadership is toxic, why are we entertaining this? Because of the asset list, I said, turning to the technical due diligence section. I need to know what they actually own. I opened the digital file containing their codebase architecture. In Part 1, I saw a diagram that looked familiar. Now, I needed to see the skeleton beneath the skin. I accessed the secure server where Ridgeway's team had uploaded their black box code for our audit. This was standard procedure. If they wanted our optimization engine, we had to know if their system could handle it. I began to scroll through the logic trees of their core database engine. It was messy, patched together by a dozen different contractors over the years. But then, I found the kernel, the central sorting algorithm that handled their high-speed inventory queries. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just familiar, it was identical. I recognized the variable naming conventions. I recognized the specific, inefficient way the loop handled null values. A bad habit I had broken myself of when I was 20, but most damning of all was a decision branch in the code. A specific workaround for a memory leak that shouldn't have existed in a modern system. I had written that workaround. I had written it on a Thursday night in my dorm room, fueled by energy drinks and panic, 3 days before my senior capstone project was due. It was a patch for a specific bug in the university's compiler. There was absolutely no reason for it to exist in a commercial enterprise software suite 6 years later, unless they had stolen it. I felt a cold rage settle over me, precise and sharp. My father had told me I had no talent. He had told me I wasn't a tech person, and yet, the very engine keeping his company on life support was built on the code I had written while he was busy ignoring me. I picked up the internal phone line. Get the forensic audit team in here, now. 10 minutes later, my lead security engineer, a brilliant woman named Sarah, was standing at my shoulder. I need a full metadata scrub on the Ridgeway repository, I ordered, my voice leaving no room for argument. I want to know the creation date of every file in the core directory. I want to commit history. I want to know the name of the root folder before it was imported into their current environment, and I want to know if there are any orphan comments left in the source code. Sarah looked at the screen, then at me. Harper, this is a standard partner review. This level of scrutiny is usually reserved for hostile takeovers or IP theft lawsuits. Just do it, I said. I need the truth before I sign anything. She didn't ask again. She typed furiously, running a script that peeled back the layers of the digital document. Here, she said after a tense 5 minutes. The core engine files. They were bulk imported 5 years, 11 months ago. The timeline aligned perfectly. That was 1 month after I left home, 1 month after I left my laptop, and my backup drives, in my bedroom. The root directory? I asked. Sarah squinted at the raw data stream. The original file path is corrupted, but I can recover the header. It looks like project_H_capstone_final. I closed my eyes. The room felt suddenly small. Project H, Harper. They hadn't just used my ideas. They had taken the files off my old computer, the one my father mocked, and pasted them directly into their commercial product. They had built their flagship update on the work of the daughter they claimed was useless. Thank you, Sarah. That will be all, I said. She hesitated. Harper, if they are using unlicensed code, we can't partner with them. It is a liability nightmare. I know, I said. Leave the report on my desk. Clear the room. When everyone was gone, I sat alone in the silence. The clock on the wall ticked toward evening. Outside, the Seattle rain had turned into a storm, lashing against the 42nd floor windows. I stood up and walked to the glass. My reflection ghosted over the city lights, a woman in a tailored suit, powerful, wealthy, and respected, but beneath the reflection, I could feel the 14-year-old girl standing in the living room, holding her laptop, waiting for a father who would never look up. He had looked up, eventually. He had looked up long enough to steal from me. They are not coming to negotiate, I whispered to the rain. They are coming to sell me my own work. The realization shifted something inside me. This wasn't just a business deal anymore. It wasn't even just a reunion. It was a crime scene. I went back to my desk and picked up the invitation for tomorrow's meeting. 2 p.m, Douglas, Samantha, Calvin. I reached for my pen and drew a thick black line under their names. Ben, I said into the intercom, my voice devoid of any warmth. Ensure the conference room is prepped, and have legal draft a secondary contract, one with a very specific indemnity clause regarding intellectual property. You think they stole something? Ben asked, his voice rising in alarm. I don't think, Ben, I said. I know. Just have it ready. I turned off the office lights. The glow of the city was the only illumination left. Tomorrow, they would walk into my world thinking they were dealing with a stranger. They had no idea that the prosecutor, the judge, and the jury were all the same person, and she was waiting for them with a gavel made of their own stolen code. The past was not just knocking on the door, it was trying to break it down. But I was the one holding the key. At exactly 2:00, the double doors to the boardroom swung open. My assistant, Elena, ushered them in with a polite nod. But I stayed seated at the head of the long mahogany table. I wanted them to walk the length of the room to get to me. It was a petty power move, perhaps, but today was not about fairness. It was about positioning. Douglas Ridgeway led the procession. He looked older than I remembered. The hair at his temples had turned fully white, and there was a slight stoop to his shoulders that his expensive Italian suit couldn't quite hide. But the walk was the same, the stride of a man who assumed every room he entered belonged to him. Behind him came Samantha. She was impeccable. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe, stylish chignon, and she wore a navy power suit that screamed executive competence. But her eyes were darting around the room, taking in the panoramic view of the Seattle skyline, the modern art on the walls, the sheer scale of my operation. It wasn't admiration, it was envy. Trailing them was Calvin Rourke. He moved differently. He was silent, sleek, and dangerous. He didn't look at the view. He looked directly at me. Douglas reached the head of the table and extended his hand. Ms. Rodriguez, he said, his voice booming with that familiar, practiced warmth. It is a pleasure to finally meet the force behind Helio Forge, Douglas Ridgeway, CEO. I stood up slowly and took his hand. His skin felt dry, like papyrus. I looked him dead in the eye. I searched for a flicker of recognition. A pause, a tilt of the head. I searched for any sign that he recognized the eyes of the daughter he had raised for 22 years. There was nothing. To him. I was just a potential checkbook. I was a stranger with a different last name, a different haircut, and a net worth that dwarfed his. He had never really looked at me when I lived in his house, so it made perfect sense that he couldn't see me now. Mr. Ridgeway, I said. My voice was cool, stripped of any accent or emotion. Please, sit. I gestured to the chairs on the opposite side. The divide was physical and symbolic. My COO, Ben, sat to my right, ready with his tablet. We appreciate you taking the time on such short notice, Douglas began, unbuttoning his jacket as he sat. I must say, your reputation precedes you. What you have built here is impressive. Let's skip the pleasantries, I said, leaning back. My team has reviewed your prospectus. The numbers are concerning. Convince me why I shouldn't pass on this immediately. Douglas didn't flinch. He launched into his pitch, a rehearsed monologue I suspected he had delivered to a dozen other investors who had already said no. The numbers only tell part of the story, Ms. Rodriguez, Douglas said, using his hands to emphasize the air. Ridgeway Dynamics is in a transition phase. We are pivoting. We have a legacy client base that is rock solid. Fortune 500 companies that have been with us for 2 decades. What we are offering Helio Forge is not just a partnership. It is immediate access to that ecosystem. It is synergy in its purest form. We provide the relationships. You provide the modernization engine. It is a perfect alignment. He threw around words like legacy, stability, and market trust like confetti. He carefully avoided saying insolvency, obsolescence, or desperation. "And the operational roadmap?" I asked, shifting my gaze to my sister. Samantha straightened up, tapping her tablet to cast a slide onto the main screen. "That is my domain," she said. Her voice was smoother than our father's, but it lacked weight. "As Vice President of Operations, I have spearheaded a complete restructuring of our development cycle. We call it the Velocity Initiative." She clicked through charts that were heavy on gradients and light on data. "We are streamlining our intake protocols to match the speed of the modern market. We are creating a culture of agility. We believe that with Helioforge's back-end support, we can leverage our proprietary data to dominate the mid-Atlantic sector." "Proprietary data," I repeated, "and the technology to process it?" "Developed in-house," Samantha said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "Our core team has been refining it for years." I glanced at Calvin Rourke. He hadn't said a word. He was leaning back in his chair, one finger tapping against his lips, watching me. He wasn't listening to the pitch. He was listening to the silence between my questions. He sensed the trap, even if he didn't know the shape of it. "Interesting," I said. I let the silence stretch. 5 seconds, 10 seconds. Douglas shifted in his seat. Samantha took a sip of water, her hand trembling slightly. "Ms. Rodriguez?" Douglas prompted, his smile faltering just a fraction. "Does the proposal align with your current strategic goals?" I didn't answer him immediately. I looked at Ben. "Ben, could you please dim the smart glass? I want to speak freely." Ben tapped a button, and the glass walls of the conference room turned opaque, sealing us off from the rest of the office. The room felt suddenly smaller, more intimate. I stood up and walked to the head of the table, placing my hands on the cool surface. "Before we discuss term sheets or synergies," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming softer but harder, "I need to clear up a matter of due diligence. I pride myself on knowing exactly who I am doing business with." "Of course," Douglas said, looking relieved that I was still talking. "We are an open book." "Are you?" I asked. I walked around the table, moving slowly behind Samantha. Then stopping behind Douglas, I felt the tension radiate off them. "I know a story about a house in Raleigh," I said, looking at the back of my father's head. "Number 4209, Sycamore Drive, a beautiful colonial-style house, perfectly manicured lawn." Douglas froze. He didn't turn around, but his shoulders stiffened. "There was a girl who lived there," I continued, pacing slowly toward the window. "She was 14 years old. She bought a laptop with the money she earned from scrubbing dishes. She wrote a piece of software to track inventory. She was so proud of it. She brought it to her father in the living room on a rainy Tuesday." Samantha turned in her chair to look at me, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Excuse me?" I ignored her. "Her father didn't look at the code. He looked at his phone. He told her she had no aptitude for technology. He told her that her sister was the one with the future." Douglas turned his chair around slowly. His face had gone the color of ash. "How do you know that address?" "I know about the graduation, too," I said, facing them now. "I know that the father didn't show up because he was too busy selling the sister's potential to an investor. I know the mother sat alone on the bleachers. And I know that the girl left that night with a backpack and a promise that she would never let anyone define her worth again." The room seemed to tilt. The air was sucked out of the space, leaving a vacuum that pressed against our eardrums. I looked at Samantha. Her mouth was slightly open, her eyes wide, searching my face, stripping away the expensive haircut and the tailored suit, looking for the ghost beneath. Then I looked at Douglas. The arrogance was gone. In its place was a dawning, horrific recognition. "I am not just Harper, CEO," I said. I took a step closer, letting the light hit my face fully. "I am Harper Rodriguez," I said clearly, "and you are my father." The silence that followed was violent. Samantha dropped her expensive fountain pen. It hit the glass table with a sharp clack that sounded like a gunshot. Douglas looked like he had been struck physically in the chest. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He gripped the armrests of his chair so hard his knuckles turned white. He stared at me, blinking rapidly, trying to reconcile the powerful woman standing before him with the memory of the quiet girl he had discarded. Calvin Rourke didn't gasp. He didn't move. He just narrowed his eyes, looking from Douglas to me, and I saw the calculation happening in real time. He realized the board had changed. He realized that the pitch was dead, and he was now sitting in a room with a family feud that had $1 billion price tag attached to it. "Harper," Douglas whispered finally. It was a broken sound. "Are you the CEO?" "I am the one you are begging to save you," I corrected him coldly. "And unfortunately for you, I have a very long memory." The silence in the room was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and thick with 6 years of unsaid words. Douglas Ridgeway looked at me as if I were a ghost that had just crawled out of a grave to haunt him. His face draining of the professional veneer he had worn for decades. His mouth opened and closed, a fish gasping on dry land. "Harper," he managed to choke out, his voice cracking on the syllables. He stood up, his hands trembling as they hovered over the table. "We need to speak, privately, just the two of us. There is so much I need to explain." I didn't move. I didn't blink. I kept my hands folded on the table, a barrier of flesh and bone between his desperation and my resolve. "This is a scheduled business meeting. Mr. Ridgeway," I said, my voice cutting through the emotional fog he was trying to create. "It is recorded. It is minute, and it is not a family reunion. If you have something to say regarding the solvency of Ridgeway Dynamics, you can say it to the room." Douglas flinched as if I had slapped him. He looked at the glass walls, then at my COO, Ben, who was watching the exchange with a mixture of shock and professional detachment. Douglas slumped back into his chair, defeated. But Samantha was different. I watched the shock ripple through her system. But unlike our father, she didn't crumble. She recalibrated. I saw the gears turning behind her eyes. She was processing the new data. Harper is the CEO. Harper has the money. Harper is the family. She straightened her blazer, picked up her pen, and her posture shifted from defensive to predatory. "Well," Samantha said, her voice steadying, "this certainly changes the dynamic of the negotiation. If the leadership of Helio Forge has a personal investment in the legacy of Ridgeway Dynamics, then we should be discussing a different tier of partnership, a strategic alliance based on shared history." I stared at her, genuinely appalled. She didn't ask how I had survived. She didn't ask why I had left. She saw my trauma as a line item on a balance sheet, something to be leveraged for a higher valuation. "We can skip the standard vetting," Samantha continued, gaining confidence. "We can move straight to the synergy phase. Surely there is a discount on the integration fees for internal stakeholders." "Stop," I said. It was a soft command, but it silenced her instantly. "Let me be crystal clear. The only thing our shared history guarantees is that I know exactly where the bodies are buried. It does not buy you a discount. It buys you scrutiny." I turned to Ben. "Draft a provisional letter of intent. But before we sign anything, I am activating Clause 14 of the Due Diligence Protocol. I want full, unrestricted access to the Ridgeway Code repository, not the black box, the source, every line, every commit, every historic version going back 7 years." Calvin Rourke spoke for the first time since the reveal. "That is highly irregular, Ms. Rodriguez. That exposes our entire intellectual property. We cannot agree to that." "Then you can leave," I said, gesturing to the door. "You have 2/4 of cash left. You have no leverage. Mr. Rourke, you give me the keys to the castle, or I let it burn down. Choose." Douglas looked at Calvin, then at me. He looked tired, beaten. "Give her the access," he murmured. "Douglas," Calvin warned, his eyes narrowing. "Give her the access," Douglas snapped. a flash of his old temper surfacing, though now it sounded desperate rather than commanding. The meeting ended 3 minutes later. They walked out of the room, leaving a turbulence in the air that took a long time to settle. As soon as the door clicked shut, Ben exhaled a breath he seemed to have been holding for an hour. He spun his chair toward me. "Harper," he said, his tone serious. "You have to tell the board." Today, I walked to the window, watching the rain streak the glass. "I can't. Not yet." "This is a massive conflict of interest," Ben argued, standing up. "You are prioritizing a failing company because of a blood relation. The board is already asking questions. Why Ridgeway? We have 3 other proposals from companies with better financials and cleaner tech stacks. If they find out you are the daughter of the CEO and you didn't disclose it, they will eat you alive. They will say you're acting emotionally." "I'm not acting emotionally," I said. Turning to face him, "I am acting forensically." "Then give me something to work with," Ben pleaded. "Tell me why we are doing this. Is it revenge? Is it charity?" "It is justice," I said. "But I need the proof. If I go to the board now, it looks like a family squabble. I need to show them that Ridgeway Dynamics isn't just a bad investment. It is a crime scene. I need that code access to prove they stole our IP. Once I have that, I can destroy them legally and professionally. Until then, I need you to trust me." Ben looked at me for a long moment. He was the only person in this building who knew me before the money, back when I was just starting to scale. "Okay," he said finally, "I will hold them off, but you are walking on a razor's edge." "Harper." The next 48 hours were a blur of sleepless tension. My forensic team was tearing apart the access we had just bullied Ridgeway into giving us. But while we were looking in, someone else was looking at them. On Thursday morning, a red flag popped up on our market intelligence dashboard. North Star Meridian. They were our biggest competitor, a corporate behemoth that specialized in hostile takeovers and stripping data assets. They had suddenly opened a channel of communication with Ridgeway Dynamics. I stared at the report on my screen. It didn't make sense. North Star didn't buy failing companies unless there was a specific asset they wanted, and Ridgeway's public assets were garbage, unless they knew about the stolen code. Unless they knew that buried inside Ridgeway's clumsy software was a kernel of genius, my genius, that could be valuable if extracted properly. "Ben," I called out, hitting the intercom. "Get security here. Now." Sarah, my head of security, walked in 10 minutes later with a grim expression. She was holding a tablet with a graph that showed a spike in data traffic. "You were right to be paranoid," Sarah said without preamble. "We placed a passive monitor on the Ridgeway network traffic as part of the due diligence agreement. We caught something." "What is it?" I asked. "Outbound data," Sarah said, tapping the screen. "Significant packets, encrypted, but the headers suggest negotiation details. Someone inside Ridgeway Dynamics is talking to North Star Meridian. They are feeding them the details of our deal." My blood ran cold. "Who is it?" "We are tracing the device fingerprint now," Sarah said. "But whoever it is, they are playing both sides. They are using your offer to bid up the price with North Star. They are trying to start a bidding war for a dying company." I sat back in my chair. It was a classic betrayal. While Douglas was playing the repentant father and Samantha was playing the savvy executive, someone was selling the furniture out the back door. "Is it Calvin?" I asked. He was the obvious choice. The vulture. "Maybe," Sarah said, "but the access point is coming from a device with high-level administrative clearance. It is coming from the family network." I closed my eyes. The image of the dinner table from 6 years ago flashed in my mind. The laughter, the exclusion, the absolute moral vacuum of that house. "Find the name," I said, my voice low. "I want to know exactly who is selling me out." Again. I had thought I was in control of this game. I thought I was the hunter. But as the rain lashed against the tower, I realized that the rot in my family ran deeper than just neglect. It was active, malicious, and it was currently trying to auction off my life's work to my worst enemy. And the terrifying part was not that they were doing it. The terrifying part was that I knew. deep down, exactly which one of them was capable of it. The digital forensic lab was the coldest room in the building. It was kept at a constant 65 degrees to protect the server racks lining the back wall. But as I stood behind Sarah's chair watching the lines of data scroll past, the chill I felt had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "We have a confirmed origin point," Sarah said, her voice devoid of inflection. She highlighted a string of alphanumeric characters on the large monitor. "The leaked documents were uploaded from this MAC address. It is an iPad Pro, registered to the Ridgeway Dynamics executive pool." "Which user?" I asked, though a heavy, sick feeling in my stomach told me I already knew. Sarah tapped a key. A name appeared next to the device ID. Samantha Ridgeway. I stared at the name, my sister, the golden child, the one who had everything I was denied. She was selling us out. "But here is the interesting part," Sarah continued, pulling up a secondary visualization. It looked like a spiderweb of data packets. She didn't send it directly to North Star Meridian. She sent it to a private encrypted server first. We traced the ownership of that relay node. It belongs to a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. "Let me guess," I said, crossing my arms. "The shell company links back to Calvin Rourke." "Directly," Sarah confirmed. "He is the broker. Samantha uploads the insider info. Calvin scrubs it and passes it to North Star, and they presumably split the commission or the back-end kickback when North Star buys the company for scraps. It was a classic pincer move. They were using my offer to drive up the valuation, hoping to trigger a bidding war that would let them cash out before the company collapsed. "Do we kill the deal?" Ben asked from the doorway behind me. "No," I said, turning away from the screen. "We don't kill it. We weaponize it. If I accused them now, they would deny it. They would claim the device was hacked or lost. I needed irrefutable proof, something that would hold up not just in a boardroom, but in a court of law. I need a term sheet," I told Ben. "A specific one. Mark the valuation at $82.5 million. It is an odd number, distinct enough to track, and add a clause, Clause 17B, stipulating a retention bonus pool of exactly $4 million. That is way above our actual valuation model," Ben noted. "I know. That is the point," I said. "Watermark the document with an invisible pixel tracker. Send it only to Douglas and Samantha via their secure executive email. Tell them it is a final, time-sensitive offer." I went back to my office and waited. It was a game of patience now. I sat in my leather chair, watching the gray Seattle sky darken into the evening. I imagined the notification popping up on Samantha's screen in Raleigh. I imagined the frantic phone call to Calvin. I imagined the greed overriding their caution. It took 4 hours. At 6 in the evening, my phone buzzed. It was Sarah. "We got a ping," she said. "North Star Meridian just contacted Ridgeway's legal team. They submitted an unsolicited counteroffer." "Let me guess the number," I said, gripping the phone. $83 million? "Close," Sarah said. 85. But here's the kicker. They specifically mentioned matching the $4 million retention pool. There is no way they could know about that clause unless they were reading the document you sent out this morning. "Got them," I whispered. I hung up and dialed Samantha's number. She answered on the second ring, sounding breathless. "Harper, we received the term sheet. Dad is looking it over. You need to come to Seattle." I interrupted her. "Tonight, there is a compliance issue with the wire transfer protocols. I cannot sign off until we clarify a signatory discrepancy in person." "Tonight?" she stammered. "Harper, that is impossible. I am in Raleigh. The flights? I have already chartered a jet," I said, my voice smooth and cold. "It is waiting at RDU. It takes off in 45 minutes. Be on it, Samantha, or the deal is dead." I hung up before she could argue. 5 hours later, the Helio Forge tower was silent. The staff had gone home. The cleaning crews were working on the lower floors. I sat in the main conference room, the same one where I had revealed my identity 2 days ago. But this time, the table was empty except for a single manila folder. When Samantha walked in, She looked exhausted. Her travel clothes were rumpled, and the confident veneer of the vice president was cracking at the edges. She looked around the empty, shadowy office. "This is spooky, Harper," she said, trying for a laugh that didn't land. "Couldn't we do this tomorrow morning? Dad is worried sick about—" "Sit down," I said. She sat. She looked at the folder. "What is the discrepancy?" I reached out and opened the folder. Inside was not a contract. It was a single sheet of paper, a printout of the data log showing the transfer from her iPad to Calvin's server. Samantha stared at it. She blinked, reading the timestamps. Her face went pale, then red. "I don't know what this is," she said, looking up at me. "This looks like technical gibberish." "It is a digital fingerprint," I said. "It shows that at 10:15 this morning, you forwarded our confidential term sheet to Calvin Rourke, who then forwarded it to North Star Meridian." "That is ridiculous," she snapped, her defensive instincts kicking in. "My iPad must have been compromised. I leave it in the office. Anyone could have used it. You are trying to frame me to lower the price." I pulled out a second sheet of paper. "This is a geolocation log," I said. "At 10:15 this morning, your iPad was not in the office. It was at the bistro on Franklin Street, the one where you have your weekly brunch." I leaned forward. "GPS does not lie. Samantha, you were there. You sent the file while you were eating your eggs Benedict. Do not lie to me again." Samantha froze. The air in the room seemed to vibrate with tension. She looked at the paper, then at the door, realizing there was no exit. Then she shattered. It wasn't a tearful apology. It was an explosion of resentment. She slammed her hand on the table. "So what if I did?" she hissed, her eyes filling with angry tears. "You think you are the only one who suffered in that house? You got to leave. Harper, you got to run away and be the mysterious genius who built an empire. You know what I got? I got the wreckage." She stood up, pacing frantically. "Dad is losing his mind. The company has been sinking for 5 years, every day. He puts pressure on me. Fix it. Samantha, be the leader. Samantha. But he won't let me change anything. He vetoes every modernization idea I have. I am trapped in a museum that is burning down." She spun around to face me. "Calvin offered me a way out, a payout, enough money to walk away and start over somewhere where I am not Douglas Ridgeway's disappointment. And then you show up, the prodigal daughter, the savior. You think you are here to rescue us? You are here to humiliate us, to show us that the one he threw away was the winner all along." I sat silently, listening to the poison pour out of her. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see the golden child. I saw a woman who had been hollowed out by the same man who had ignored me. I had been neglected. She had been consumed. I wasn't sure which was worse. "You are right," I said quietly. "He broke you, too. He turned you into a fraud to feed his own ego." Samantha stopped pacing. She looked at me, her chest heaving, waiting for the blow. "But that does not excuse corporate espionage," I said, my voice hardening again. "You broke the law. Samantha, you betrayed your fiduciary duty, and you betrayed me." I stood up and walked over to her. I towered over her slightly in my heels. "I have enough evidence in this folder to send you to prison for 5 years, I said. "Insider trading, IP theft, breach of non-disclosure. I can ruin you before sunrise." Samantha flinched, tears finally spilling over. "Harper, please, I just want it out." "I am going to give you a choice," I said. "Option A is I call the police, and you leave this building in handcuffs. Option B is to help me." "Help you do what?" she whispered. "Calvin Rourke is the parasite," I said. "He is the one engineering the sale to North Star. I want him gone, and I want him exposed. You are going to go back to him. You are going to pretend everything is fine, and then, when I give the signal, you are going to give me everything he has on the board members. The kickback scheme, all of it." Samantha wiped her face. She looked at the folder, then at me. She saw the steel in my eyes. "And if I do?" she asked. "Then you walk away," I said. "You won't work for Ridgeway Dynamics anymore. You won't work for me. But you will be free. No prison. No lawsuit. Just a clean slate." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "He will destroy me if he finds out." "He won't have time," I said. "Because I am going to destroy him first." I held out the folder. "Do we have a deal?" Samantha reached out, her hand trembling, and took the file. She held it to her chest like a shield. "Deal," she whispered. I nodded. "Good. Go back to the hotel. Fix your face. Tomorrow. We are not sisters. We are conspirators. And Calvin Rourke is going to wish he had never heard the name Ridgeway." As she walked out, I turned back to the window. The rain had stopped, but the city was still dark. I had turned on my sister, but the war wasn't over. The biggest secret was still buried in the code. And when I unearthed that, it wouldn't just be Calvin who fell. It would be my father. The progress bar on the secure transfer screen hit 100%, turning a cheerful bright green that felt completely at odds with the sickness rising in my throat. I was sitting in my private office, the door locked, the blinds drawn against the gray morning light. On the screen before me was the complete, unadulterated source code of Ridgeway Dynamics. After the disastrous meeting and the threat I had leveled at Samantha, they had capitulated. They had handed over the keys to the kingdom, terrified that I would let their company collapse if they didn't. I opened the root directory. My forensic team had already flagged the anomalies, but I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed to trace the digital scars myself. I navigated to the core logic folder, the beating heart of their supposed proprietary technology. I right-clicked on the main executable file and selected Properties. Then Origin History. The metadata spilled out like a confession. The file hadn't been created in the Ridgeway commercial environment. It had been imported. The source path was still embedded in the ghost data, a breadcrumb trail they had been too sloppy to scrub. Source: e:/external_volume/Harper_backup/capstone_final_. Build. The date of the import was June 22nd. 6 years ago, I stared at the date, June 22nd. That was exactly 4 days after I had packed my bag and walked out of the house. That was 3 days after my father had told me, to my face, that I had no future in technology. He hadn't just dismissed me. He had waited for me to leave, walked into my empty bedroom, booted up the desktop I had left behind, and copied the very work he had mocked onto an external drive. I opened the code itself, placing it side by side with the archived version of my college capstone project that I kept on my private server. It was not similar. It was a photocopy. There were the variable names I had used, shorthand references to characters from books I was reading at the time. There was the specific, slightly inefficient sorting algorithm I had written to manage heavy data loads, a quirk of my coding style when I was 21. He hadn't even bothered to refactor it. He had taken the product of my wasted time and built a company around it. A cold, hard fury settled in my chest. It wasn't the hot anger of a teenager anymore. This was the glacial rage of a CEO who realizes she has been defrauded. He had built his reputation, his turnaround, and his lifestyle on the intellectual property of the daughter he was ashamed of. He had told the world I was nothing, while secretly feeding his empire with my mind. My phone buzzed on the desk. The caller ID flashed. Douglas Ridgeway. I stared at the name for a long moment before picking it up. I didn't say hello. I just listened. "Harper?" His voice sounded weary, threaded with a false intimacy that grated on my nerves. "I'm glad you picked up. The lawyers are making so much noise. But I wanted to reach out. Father to daughter." "I am listening," I said. My voice was flat, revealing nothing. "I know things were tense in the boardroom," Douglas said, "and I know we have history, but I need you to separate the family issues from the business reality. Ridgeway Dynamics is more than just me. It is a legacy. And honestly, Harper, I did try to find you. After you left, I wanted to make things right. You looked for me? I asked, looking at the timestamp on the screen. June 22nd. When exactly did you start looking? Douglas? Before or after you went into my room and accessed my hard drive? There was silence on the line, a beat too long. I don't know what you are talking about, he lied. I went in there to preserve your things, to keep a memory of you. You stole from me, I said, cutting him off. You told me I had no talent, and then you stole my capstone project to patch your failing back-end. You are not calling me because you miss your daughter. You are calling me because you are afraid I am going to find out that your entire flagship product is built on stolen property. Harper, be reasonable. His voice hardened, dropping the fatherly act. Whatever work you did as a student was done under my roof, on electricity I paid for. Technically, do not finish that sentence, I warned him. Do not try to claim ownership of my mind because you paid the electric bill. I hung up. I couldn't listen to another second of his rationalization. 10 minutes later, Ben walked in. He looked grim. Behind him was our general counsel, a sharp-eyed woman named Marcus. We have reviewed the preliminary audit findings, Marcus said, placing a file on my desk. Harper, this is radioactive. If Ridgeway Dynamics is running on stolen code, specifically code that belongs to you personally, we cannot partner with them. It exposes Helioforge to massive liability. If we integrate their tech and a third party finds out the IP is disputed, we get sued. So what are my options? I asked. Option 1, Marcus said, holding up a finger. We sue them. We filed an injunction for intellectual property theft today. We shut them down. We strip them of the asset. Ridgeway Dynamics goes bankrupt within 30 days. Option 2, Ben added. We walk away. We rescind the offer, cite due diligence failure, and let them sink on their own. North Star Meridian buys them, finds the stolen code later, and it becomes their problem. And the employees? I asked. The 200 people working in the Raleigh office? The support staff? The junior devs who had nothing to do with this? If we sue, they lose their jobs, Ben admitted. If we walk, North Star buys the company and strips it for parts. They lose their jobs anyway. I turned my chair to look out the window. The rain had started again, blurring the city into a watercolor of gray and slate. I was trapped. My heart wanted to burn Douglas to the ground. I wanted to file that lawsuit and watch his face as the marshals walked into his office. I wanted the world to know he was a fraud. But if I did that, I would be destroying the livelihoods of innocent people. People who were just like I had been, trying to pay rent and buy groceries. And there was something else. A small, stupid part of me that still hurts. Acknowledging the theft publicly meant acknowledging that my father had only ever valued me as a resource, never as a person. It made the rejection final. Give me the night, I said to Ben and Marcus. Don't file anything yet. I need to think. Harper, we are on a clock, Marcus warned. I said give me the night, I snapped. They left, closing the door softly. I sat there for hours as the office emptied out. The cleaning crew came and went, giving my glass walls a wide berth. I felt heavy, anchored by a grief I hadn't expected. I had won. I was the billionaire CEO. I held the knife. So why did I feel like the one bleeding? At 9 o'clock, the security desk called up. Ms. Rodriguez? The guard said. I know it is late, and you said no visitors, but there is a woman here. She says she is your mother. I froze. Send her up, I whispered. 5 minutes later, the elevator doors slid open. My mother stepped out. She looked older than the image I held in my mind. Her hair was grayer, her face lined with new worries, but she had the same gentle eyes. She was wearing a raincoat that was damp from the Seattle drizzle, and she was clutching an old, battered cardboard box against her chest. She didn't look at the expensive art or the sprawling city view. She looked straight at me. I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady. Mom? She walked across the room. She didn't hug me immediately. She set the box down on my pristine conference table with a thud. He told me you were destroying the company. she said. Her voice was quiet but firm. He told me you were being vindictive, that you had forgotten where you came from. He stole my code. Mom, I said, the words catching in my throat. He stole everything. I know, she said. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small key. She opened the battered box. He thinks he erased it all, my mother said. He thinks he wiped the computers and burned the notebooks, but he forgot that I was the one who cleaned the house. Inside the box were stack after stack of letters, envelopes addressed to me, in her handwriting, with return to sender stamped on them, dozens of them. I wrote to you every week for the first year, she said, tears welling in her eyes. He intercepted them. He told me the address was wrong, or that you were rejecting them. He hid them in his study. She reached deeper into the box and pulled out a silver USB drive. It was old, scuffed. And I found this, she said. The night you left before he went into your room, I went in first. I didn't know what was valuable and what wasn't. I just knew he would take whatever he could use, so I made a copy. She slid the drive across the table. This is the proof. Harper, she said. This is the original timestamp. This is the backup he doesn't know exists. If you need to prove he stole it, this proves it beyond a shadow of a doubt. I looked at the drive, then at the letters, then at her. Why? I asked. Why bring this to me now? If I use this, his company dies. Your lifestyle, the house, it all goes away. My mother reached out and took my hand. Her skin was warm. Because I watched him break you, she said. And I stayed silent because I was afraid. I let him drive you away. I am not protecting him anymore. Harper, I am done being the peacekeeper in a war he started. She squeezed my hand. You have the power now, she said. You can burn it all down. You have the right. But before you decide, just know that you were never alone. I was always writing. I was always keeping your things safe. I looked at the box of undelivered letters. The anger that had been fueling me for 48 hours suddenly cooled, replaced by a clarity that was sharp and painful. I wasn't just fighting a businessman anymore. I was fighting a ghost. And with the evidence in this box, I finally had the weapon to exorcise him completely. The cardboard box on my conference table looked innocuous, like something you would use to store old tax returns or holiday ornaments. But as I reached inside, my fingers brushed against paper that felt heavy with time and intent. I pulled out the first bundle of letters. They were tied together with a simple rubber band that had grown brittle with age. I looked at the top envelope. The postmark was dated 5 years and 8 months ago. The address was my first apartment in Tacoma, the one above the laundromat. I had never told my parents where I lived, yet there it was, written in my mother's neat, looping cursive. How did you know where I was? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I hired a private investigator the week you left, my mother said, her hands resting on the edge of the table. I didn't tell Douglas. He was too busy telling everyone at the club that you were on a sabbatical to find yourself, but I needed to know you were safe. I flipped the envelope over. Stamped across the front in red ink were the words, "Return to sender." I sent one every week, she continued, her voice trembling slightly. For the first year, then once a month after that, I told you I was proud of you. I told you about the garden. I told you that I missed the sound of your typing late at night. I never got them, I said, looking up at her. I thought you had forgotten me. Douglas, she said. The name hung in the air like smoke. He has a contact at the local distribution center. He had a hold placed on mail coming from our house to your name. He intercepted them all. He told me they were bouncing back because you refused to open them. He said you were rejecting us. I felt a crack form in the armor I had spent 6 years welding around my heart. My father hadn't just stolen my code. He had stolen my mother. He had engineered a silence between us to protect his own ego, to keep the narrative that I was the ungrateful child, and he was the benevolent patriarch. My mother reached into the box again and pulled out the USB drive she had shown me moments ago. She placed it on top of the letters. I knew, she said softly. When Ridgeway Dynamics launched the new inventory system, Douglas was so proud. He bragged about the new architecture, but I remembered seeing those diagrams on your floor. I remembered the shapes. I am not a tech person, Harper, but I am a mother. I know my daughter's handwriting, even when it is written in code. So you kept this? I asked, picking up the drive. I backed it up the night you left, she said. I knew that one day he would cross a line. I knew that one day you would come back, and you would need ammunition. I didn't want you to come to a gunfight with empty hands. She took a breath, and then she dropped the second bomb, the one that reshaped my entire understanding of my own history. And Marianne, she said. I froze. Marianne Klein? My angel investor? She was my roommate in college, my mother said. Before I married Douglas, before I became just a wife. I stared at her, the room spinning slightly. The memory of that first meeting in Bellevue flashed through my mind. Marianne had given me 10 minutes. She had written a check for $50,000 without blinking. She had told me to build something clean. You called her, I realized. I called her the morning you got on the bus, my mother admitted. I told her you were coming. I told her you were brilliant, and that you were hurt, and that you needed a chance. I asked her not to tell you. I knew you needed to believe you did it all on your own. I did it on my own, I said. But the conviction was wavering. You built the engine, Harper, she said firmly. You did the work. You stayed up the nights. You made the sales. But I opened the door, just a crack, because that is what mothers do when their children are walking into a storm. I sat down heavily in my leather chair. For 6 years, I had told myself a story of absolute isolation. I was the lone wolf. I was the survivor. But I hadn't been alone. My mother had been there, in the shadows, catching the bullets I didn't even know were being fired. She had been paving the road ahead of me while I was too busy looking behind me to notice. The tears finally came. They weren't the angry, hot tears of the boardroom. They were quiet, releasing tears. I put my head in my hands and let out a shuddering breath. My mother walked around the table and placed a hand on my shoulder. She didn't hug me like a child. She held me like a warrior tending to another warrior. I am not here to tell you to forgive him, she said, her voice steel. I am not here to ask for mercy. Douglas made his choices. He chose his pride over his children. He chose his company over his ethics. She looked at the USB drive, then at the view of the city. You have the power to end this however you want. Harper, you can use that drive to file a lawsuit tomorrow. You can destroy his reputation. You can bankrupt the company. It would be justice. But, I asked, wiping my face, but there are 200 people working in that building in Raleigh who didn't steal your code, she said. There are secretaries who have been there for 20 years. There are young engineers just starting out. If you burn the house down to kill the rat, they burn too. She stepped back. I didn't raise you to be Douglas. He destroys things to make himself feel big. You build things. She turned to leave. I am staying at the Fairmont. Call me when it is done. When the elevator doors closed, I was alone again, but the silence felt different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with clarity. I looked at the USB drive. It was the nuclear option. If I used it, I won. But it was a Pyrrhic victory. It would prove I was right. But it would make me exactly what my father said I was. Destructive. Emotional. I stood up and walked to the window. The rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking, revealing the jagged line of the Olympic Mountains in the distance. I wasn't going to sue. That was too slow. And I wasn't going to walk away. That was too weak. I was going to take it all. I picked up the phone and dialed Ben. It was nearly midnight, but he answered on the first ring. Harper? Ben sounded anxious. Have you decided? Marcus has the withdrawal letter drafted. We can send it in the morning. Delete the letter, I said. My voice was calm, devoid of the tremors that had shaken me an hour ago. What? Ben asked. Harper, the liability. I am not withdrawing, I said. And I am not suing. We are going to acquire them. but the terms have changed. Harper, we can't pay $80 million for a company built on stolen IP, Ben argued. We are not paying $80 million, I said. We are not paying anything close to that. I want you to draft a new term sheet, a hostile acquisition strategy. We are going to leverage IP theft not to destroy them, but to own them. I don't understand, Ben said. I am going to save the company, Ben, I said. I am going to save the employees. I am going to save the client list, but the leadership? The leadership is going to be exercised like a tumor. I looked at the letters on my desk. Set up the meeting for tomorrow morning, I ordered. Full legal team, and tell Marcus to bring the non-disclosure agreements, the heavy ones. What are we calling this operation? Ben asked. Sensing the shift in my mood. Call it a family reunion, I said. I hung up the phone. The sadness was gone. The hesitation was gone. My mother had given me the key, and now I was going to unlock the door. The next time I walked into that boardroom, I wouldn't be the daughter seeking approval, and I wouldn't be the victim seeking revenge. I would be the CEO, and I was going to finish the job my father said I was never capable of starting. The atmosphere in the boardroom was not just tense, it was brittle, like a pane of glass moments before shattering. My legal team sat on the left, a phalanx of dark suits and grim expressions. On the right sat the remnants of Ridgeway Dynamics, Douglas, Samantha, Calvin Rourke, and their visibly nervous general counsel. Outside, the Seattle rain had cleared, leaving the sky a piercing, unforgiving blue, but inside, the air was thick with the scent of coffee and impending doom. I did not sit. I stood at the head of the table, my hands resting on a stack of documents that were about to change everything. We are not here to negotiate, I began, my voice steady and projecting to the back of the room. The offer you received this morning is not a starting point. It is a lifeline, and it is the only one you are going to get. Douglas looked at the papers in front of him. He looked older today. The fight drained out of him. Harper, he started, his voice rasping. The valuation is barely above our debt load. You are buying the company for pennies on the dollar. I am buying a liability, I corrected him. I am buying a company that has been insolvent for 2 quarters. I am buying a lawsuit waiting to happen, and I am buying a cleanup job that will take me 2 years to fix. I signaled to Ben. He tapped his screen, and the main terms appeared on the smart glass wall. These are the conditions, I said. They are non-negotiable. Clause 1, I read aloud. Employment security. Helio Forge guarantees the retention of all current Ridgeway Dynamics staff below the executive level for a minimum period of 24 months. No layoffs, no restructuring redundancies. Your people keep their jobs, their benefits, and their pensions. Douglas blinked. He looked up at me, genuine surprise registering in his eyes. He had expected me to gut the company, to fire everyone who had ever worked for him as an act of spite. He didn't understand that I wasn't him. I didn't punish innocent people for the sins of leadership. Clause 2, I continued, my eyes locking onto him. Executive restructuring. Douglas Ridgeway will resign as CEO effective immediately upon signature. He will retain the title of Founder Emeritus. It is an honorary role, no voting rights, no operational authority, no office access without prior board approval. Douglas flinched. His legacy was being stripped away, leaving him with nothing but a hollow title. Clause 3, I said, shifting my gaze to my sister. Samantha Ridgeway will vacate the position of Vice President of Operations. She lacks the technical competency for the role. Samantha opened her mouth to protest, but I raised a hand. However, I said, softening my tone just a fraction, she will be offered a choice. Option A is a severance package and a clean break. Option B is enrollment in our executive retraining program, starting at a director level in a different division. Reporting to a neutral manager, she can learn the business the right way, from the ground up, or she can leave. Samantha looked down at her hands. For the first time, she wasn't being handed a position. She was being offered a ladder. It was more than she deserved, but it was fair. "This is unacceptable," Calvin Rourke interrupted. He slammed his folder shut. "You are decapitating the leadership. You are undervaluing the assets. We have a counter-offer from North Star Meridian that is 20% higher. If you don't match it, we walk." I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile. "I was hoping you would bring that up, Calvin," I said. I picked up the black folder on my right, the evidence file my mother had given me, combined with the forensic report. "There is no counteroffer," I said, "because North Star Meridian doesn't want to buy a crime scene." I opened the folder and slid a single document down the long table. It spun perfectly. Coming to a stop right in front of Douglas, it was the metadata report of the core source code. "Your flagship engine," I said to the room. "The one you claim is proprietary. It contains 80% of the code from my college capstone project, code that was effectively stolen from my personal hard drive on June 22nd, 6 years ago." The silence that followed was absolute. The lawyers on the Ridgeway side stopped writing. Their general counsel turned pale and looked at Douglas. "Is this true?" the lawyer whispered. Douglas didn't answer. He couldn't. "I have the original backups," I said. "I have the timestamps. I have the chain of custody. I could file an injunction right now, if I do. Ridgeway Dynamics ceases to exist by 5 o'clock today. The assets freeze. The employees lose everything. And you, Douglas, end up in a deposition explaining why you built your empire on your daughter's homework." I let that sink in. "But I am not going to do that," I said. "Because unlike you, I care about the 200 people working in Raleigh, so I am buying the company to save them, not you." Calvin stood up, adjusting his suit jacket. "This is a bluff. You won't sue your own father. It is bad PR. We are leaving." "You are leaving, Calvin," I said. "But not because you are walking away from the deal." I signaled Ben again. The screen changed. It showed the email logs, the timestamp transfer of the term sheet from Samantha's iPad, the relay through Calvin's shell company, the kickback agreement with North Star. "We know you leaked the confidential term sheet," I said. "We know you were trying to trigger a bidding war to pump your commission. That is fraud. Calvin, it is a breach of fiduciary duty, and since we control the evidence—" I looked at the Ridgeway General Counsel. "I imagine you want to avoid a conspiracy charge?" The lawyer nodded vigorously. He turned to Calvin. "Mr. Rourke, I must advise you to recuse yourself from this meeting immediately, and I would suggest you retain separate counsel." Calvin looked around the room. He saw the walls closing in. He saw Samantha refusing to meet his eyes. She had kept her end of our deal. He realized he had been outmaneuvered. Without a word, Calvin Rourke picked up his briefcase and walked out the door. Now, it was just family. Douglas sat alone at the center of the wreckage. The high-powered board member was gone. His leverage was gone. His secret was out. He looked at the contract in front of him. He looked at the clause protecting his employees. He realized, finally, the magnitude of his error. He had spent his life looking for a successor, for someone strong enough to carry the weight of his legacy. He had bet on Samantha because she was polished. He had ignored me because I was quiet. But in the end, I was the only one strong enough to save the people he had failed. He picked up the pen. His hand was shaking, a tremor I had never seen in the iron-fisted patriarch of my youth. "I sign this," Douglas whispered. "And it is over?" "You sign this," I said. "And the company survives. The lie ends. The truth begins." He signed. The scratching of the pen was the loudest sound in the world. 20 minutes later, the lawyers had cleared out. The board members had left. It was just Douglas and me in the vast, empty room. He stood up slowly, looking small against the backdrop of the skyline I owned. "I need to know," he said, his voice hollow. "Why didn't you destroy me? You had the code. You had the theft. You could have buried me." "Because Mom asked me not to," I said. He flinched. "And because I am not you," I added. "I don't build myself up by tearing other people down." Douglas walked to the window, staring out at the city. "I took the code," he said, his back to me. "Not because I needed it. Well, I did need it. But I took it because that night, when you showed me the inventory tool, I was terrified." He turned around. "You were 14, and you saw things I couldn't see. You understood systems I couldn't grasp. I felt obsolete. I felt small, and I hated you for making me feel small." It was the most honest thing he had ever said. He hadn't rejected me because I was inadequate. He had rejected me because I was formidable. "I am sorry," he said. "I know that word doesn't fix anything, but I want to ask, is there a chance? Not for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve that. But a chance to show you that I can learn? That I can be something other than the man who failed you?" I looked at him. I saw the regret etched into the lines of his face. I saw the lonely old man who had driven away his wife and daughter in pursuit of a legacy that turned out to be a sham. I could have told him to go to hell. I could have walked out and never spoken to him again. But the war was over, and I had won. Peace wasn't about liking your enemy. It was about ensuring they could no longer hurt you. "I am not going to offer you forgiveness, Dad," I said. It was the first time I had called him that in 6 years. "Forgiveness is cheap." I walked to the door and opened it. I looked back at him one last time. "If you want a relationship with me, or with Mom, you are going to have to work for it. You are going to have to show up. You are going to have to be humble. And you are going to have to respect the fact that I am the one in charge now." "I understand," he said quietly. "How do I start?" I looked him dead in the eye. "Earn it," I said. I walked out and let the door click shut behind me. It wasn't a slam. It was a precise, mechanical latching, the sound of a chapter ending, and a new, unwritten book opening up. I walked down the hall, past the rows of servers humming with the code I had written, ready to build something that was finally truly mine. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal, justice, and the long road to redemption. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Drop a comment below with your city or country so we can see how far Harper's story has traveled. If you enjoyed this journey, please make sure to subscribe to Monica Revenge Stories, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this video get discovered by more people who need a little victory in their lives. See you in the next story.